Hello, you're with Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. I'm Karen McCarthy. In this edition, a past president special with a post-mortem on TAF. The controversial share trading scheme got the green light on June the 25th. Did the vote go the right way? Fonterra calls it an important evolution in the cooperative's capital structure. Debate has been rigorous, but far from everybody's convinced. And proving no one's out of reach of the law, the Fonterra director pinged for an effluent spill into a Bay of Plenty waterway, prosecuted and fined $72,000. My guests in the studio this week, Southland's Don Nicolson, and from the Manawatu, Charlie Pedersen, both lifelong farmers and past presidents of Federated Farmers. Thanks for being with us today. Can't go past TAF this week. Big week for the dairy industry, possibly the biggest since the formation of the co-op. Did the vote go the right way? Charlie?
It did, because we've got a decision. That's the main thing. In a cooperative, you need unity behind whatever decision's made. The majority of the shareholders have made a decision to support TAF, and now the only thing that remains is that those who had some doubts now swing in behind and support the majority.
Would you call it a solid mandate? I know Henry van der Hayden has described it in those terms, or did they squeak through? Because some are saying this is a bare majority. Well,
whatever term you put on it, it's sort of splitting hairs. They've got enough of a majority to get the decision and the mandate they need. Now they need to move on.
Don, I know you're not in dairy, but you must have watched what's been unfolding over the last couple of years with interest.
Sure. Yeah, I have watched it with interest, and I've observed the amount of spend and the PR spin on the whole concept, and it looks on the face of it that it didn't amount to much, but it's a lot of money. I'd suggest they've spent thousands of dollars spent per shareholder to get this over the line, and I've got no problem with that. It's just the way it is. But relative to me in a campaign, for instance, in the election last year, all political parties in New Zealand would never have spent as much as Fonterra has spent on the PR spin.
True.
It's been a hard sell, hasn't it?
Mm.
A different and new concept. Takes people a while to get their heads around that. You know, you've got to remember there's generations of farming families have built up what is now Fonterra, and some of them still think pretty carefully about whether they take the next step and whether they might endanger the work of all those forebears.
It's protecting what we have, isn't it? That's at issue here. I mean, you've got to have an eye on the future, but the concern is that we don't lose what has been built up over the last 10, 11, 12 years.
Quite, and the protection mechanism in Fonterra always is that you've got a whole bunch of farmer directors running that company, and they have to stand for re-election. So there's a pretty blunt message if they do get out of step with the shareholders. I don't think they have at this stage.
Don, do you think they all have their eye on the same ball from what you've seen?
I think they do, but what I would suggest, and perhaps a bit of contradiction to Charlie, is that there's the shareholder council and there's another tier of people under that as well. I mean, for 10,500 shareholders, it shouldn't be so hard to convince people that things are on the right track, and the directors are the sole responsibility, people responsible for the outcome of Fonterra. So Charlie is right there, that the blowtorch is on the directors, and that's where it cuts the mustard.
You were talking about the spend on this, on selling it to the farmer shareholders. Have we got any idea how much it has cost overall?
Well, look, there's figures being put my way, and look, I don't know whether they're accurate or not, but it is in the tens of millions. And, you know, that is a lot of money per shareholder.
That's an incredible amount of money, isn't it? I mean, I know Fonterra has deep pockets, but when you think what else that money could have been spent on.
Yeah, and of course people link it back to, it's only a minuscule amount per kilogram of milk solid. It doesn't matter. It seems to be slightly wasteful, but it's got what they want, and no doubt it just merges into the balance sheet and goes out the other side. So look, it's all done. Boy, what I think New Zealand dairy farmers need to be really mindful of now, though, is the Dairy Industry Restructuring Act amendments, and that's where their eye needs to be really on the ball.
Do you think the TAF vote, important as it has been something of a distraction and a sideshow from DIRA?
Well, maybe. The Minister for Primary Industry said that there would be no TAF reforms without, no DIRA reforms without TAF, so he's got his way, effectively. So at this point, there's still water to go under that bridge.
Onno van Beckham, an international dairy co-op consultant, has been in the country this last week. I don't think he might have been here at the invitation of Fonterra, I'm not sure, but speaking about TAF, he said anything less than 75% support from the shareholder base would make progressing TAF difficult. They didn't get there. Is he right? Do you think that they're still going to be struggling, do you think, to get this thing moving along?
I think he's technically correct. 75% is the usual hurdle for getting things going in a cooperative. Fonterra easily passed it with the first step of TAF at an 80% touch. They didn't only under the rules we operate under. They only have to get 50% the next time. So he's kind of right, but not technically not correct this time. And I think that the important thing is that Fonterra now shows the way forward for its shareholders, and the shareholders swing in behind the directors. You know, we've got to act like a team. The co-op is only powerful when it works together.
How does Fonterra do that? How does it get everybody back on side? Because clearly this has been a bitter and divisive issue. How do you get unity back into the co-op after something like this?
I'll just pick you up on bitter and divisive, I should say. It might look like that from the outside. Dairy industry politics, I think, are probably some of the most bloodthirsty politics that I've ever observed, and I've observed a lot. So I don't think it's particularly divisive by dairy industry standards. The dairy farmers are very robust people. They all run their own individual businesses. They're accustomed to being the captain of their own ship, so they don't take instructions very easily, but they do believe in the co-op. And I think what we're going to see now is that those farmers who have been against TAF up until now will now swing in behind the cooperative, because those people in particular who were against TAF were wanting to defend what was already there, and they were fearful of the future. They know that the biggest danger to the Fonterra co-op is that we have divisiveness amongst us as we try to go forward. So I'm pretty sure those people will now swing in behind.
Are you saying would you agree with Sir Henry van der Hayden? It was a rowdy minority, I think is how he dismissed them or described them at some point along the way.
Definitely a minority. The minority might have been a bit bigger than Henry thought it was going to be. But anyway, look, it's in the past now, and the important thing now is that we all move forward together.
What lessons do we learn from this, from the way this has been handled? You mentioned the spend on this. Fonterra, do you think we're hell-bent on getting this through no matter what the cost?
Well, to a casual observer, once they started that momentum, they certainly didn't want to lose it, and they have had to spend money to get it to the point that the directors have always wanted to get it to. I observed the meat industry in the mid-80s and the takeover of Alliance Group, Waitaki by Alliance Group, and the blood that was left on the ground there. I mean, there's lots of instances of this sort of tension in farmer cooperatives in the country, and this is just another part of the evolution.
You mentioned tension, and Charlie, you've said to me you think tension is possibly a good and a healthy thing for a cooperative.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, and at least the debate is always held. It's robust, but I think history proves that once the debate's been held, the vote's been taken, shareholders swing in behind the majority.
And is there a tendency for farmers to swing in behind their shareholders' councils on things like this, and the council laid its cards on the tables?
Yes, absolutely. Don talked about the interesting structure we have, where we have a board of directors, and then we have the shareholders' council, and then we have another group of shareholders operating at another level below that again as a network. It's all part of trying to keep the co-op talking amongst itself and keeping good, healthy debate going, and giving the directors and the shareholders' council good information about what their shareholders are thinking and talking about. So I think it's a really robust organisation, and I'm sure it's going to brush this off and carry on into the future really well.
Coming up, more on TAF. The farmer's dilemma is well understood. Should we protect what we have or be open to larger possibilities? Stay with us on Straight Talk. Hello, I'm Karen McCarthy. You're back with Straight Talk. Our guests, past presidents of Federated Farmers, Charlie Pedersen and Don Nicolson. The anti-faction, you were saying to me that was an important element of this process.
Of course, it's part of the democratic process. You need to actually have people that do throw their gaze over something in a different light to the promoters of such a concept, and they did a fine job. Leonie Guiney and her team, Eddie Glass, Lachlan McKenzie and others did a fine job. As much as it upset many of the shareholders, I think it's very important those people exist, and they did a great job, and time will tell whether they were were right or wrong. I think they're very supportive of the cooperative. I know that. They just wanted to make sure that the checks and balances were there. And I think Simon Cooper's resignation from the shareholder council at the sort of 12th hour did put the spanner in the works for a lot of people's thinking.
That was quite a step, quite an extraordinary step at that point in the proceedings, wasn't it?
Hugely principled note. My hat is lifted to Simon for being as principled in his own mind for doing that.
And it sent a very clear signal, didn't it, too, that, you know, in his view, all was not well.
Sure. And so he made his decision to be principled beyond belief, and I think there's not many people in New Zealand that can do that, and he should be acknowledged for that.
Was it fair of Fonterra, do you think, to dismiss that anti-brigade as a rowdy minority, which was quite dismissive? As you say, that's an important part of the process.
Sure. Well, if you've spent so much on the PR, you don't want rowdy noise coming from the side, and so it is a bit dismissive of them. And in fact, I don't think they thought there would be so much pressure coming from that smaller group as you sort of talk about. And so we've got what we've got, and we're going, as Charlie said earlier, it's just about moving through the next phase, and we will.
What, Charlie, do you think this whole affair has done to or for the spirit of the cooperative?
Oh, undoubtedly it will have strengthened it because, once it's like a family. You have a bit of a dust-up in a family, and then the family gets back together again and moves on and remembers the experience and what was good and bad about that. And I think that the Fonterra is really a family. Like I said before, the involvement of the shareholders sometimes goes back many generations, 4 or 5 in some cases. And so there's a lot of family ties there, and people have memories. They remember what was good and what was bad, but we know that being together and operating as a co-op is vastly superior to anything else. So that's what we want to do.
So this is not a body blow from which the co-op cannot recover. You think it will move on quite rapidly, or it has to move on quite rapidly from this?
I'm sure it will, and it will. It has to, and it will.
It's big boys games, big boys rules out there, and we're on a playing field where the competition is getting better and better. There can be no standing still, and is that something you think farmers have realised, even though they might not feel 100% comfortable with where Fonterra is heading, that there is a risk in doing nothing?
There's an absolute risk in doing nothing, and the New Zealand dairy industry started off as a disaster, and it wasn't until the Labor government stepped in the early 1900s and formed the New Zealand Dairy Board, created a single marketer, that we actually got, that New Zealand dairy farmers actually started to have a market that they could believe in, and the co-ops then built up. That was a really good learning for New Zealand dairy farmers. It's ingrained in the psyche of everybody, and we know that we are so far from our market, as far as any food producers are from their main market, and we have to be well organised, much better organised than our competitors, if we want to do any good. The reality is we've done probably better than most dairy farmers in the world for nearly 100 years, and that's not to be sneered at, and that's why I think the cooperative is seen as the way to deliver the best results back to New Zealand farmers.
Don, that's a challenge facing all farmers, isn't it? Not just the dairy sector, in terms of keeping on top of the game and ahead of the competition overseas.
Absolutely right. But I have to say that in the meat industry, for instance, there is examples of the corporates leaving skeletons behind after having some good harvest and leaving the shareholders with nothing. So look, there's a need to be wary about this discussion about, the buzzword is moving forward. There is some real rigour needed to be put around all the thinking that's going on by people in suits, because New Zealand was made by people in boots, not men in suits, and we need to get to we need to respect those people in boots.
It's interesting when you look at the changing face of farm ownership in this country, corporates getting involved, amalgamation farms getting bigger and bigger. I know you've made the point in the past, Charlie, that when times are tough, it's only the traditional family kind of owners that are prepared to put up with those lean times, which are part and parcel of the farming cycle. They're in it for the long haul. Outside investors may not be.
Oh, that's correct, and I think that I disagree that we're getting more corporate farmers. People look at big farming operations and tend to think they're corporates. Very often it's still a farming family that's got together and created a largish entity. The idea of a corporate where you have mum and dad city investors who have tradable shares in a farming company really hasn't got going in New Zealand, and where they ever have tried it, they haven't stood the test of time, because the city investors, or whoever they are, can't stand the years when there's just no return at all, whereas a farming family just expects that, deals with it.
Good point, isn't it? They're in for the long haul, even when times are tough.
Sure, they are in for the long haul. Interesting thing to me is apparently consumers are demanding this provenance food sort of paradigm, and it's going to be very difficult for any corporate to deliver provenance foods. Only mum and dad, owner-operators, can do the provenance food thing, and so we're perhaps going to have a mix. It's again an evolutionary process. People want to know where their food is derived from, what farming systems were deployed, animal welfare, standards on the farm, all sorts of things. I'm not saying everyone wants that. In a cooperative model, you can't have that easily because everything is stockpiled into a big bin, effectively. Provenance foods are where you market your individual wares, and that is apparently a growing market, and of course a higher paying market, supposedly. I mean, I'm yet to see all this, but that's what the next paradigm could be. So the owner-operator will survive.
Yeah, I agree. I think that increasingly the consumers of food wanting to know a little bit about the person who's behind that food being produced. There's always a person behind it. It doesn't happen by accident, and they want to know a little bit about that. So you'll see increasingly in the value-added type products faces of people who are involved in the businesses that are producing the food. They want to know, who is that guy? Where does he come from? How many generations has his family been doing it?
It's all to do with food safety, food quality, those kind of important issues.
And tell the story.
It's about the story as well. It's, you know, if you think about how people choose a wine, they want to know where it came from. They don't really want to drink the local wine. They want to drink one that came from somewhere else, but they want to know a little bit of the story about how that came to be there in that bottle. So other food, you know, meat and milk is just the same. People want to know a little bit about the story.
And that's the same for overseas buyers as well, I guess, of our product.
That's absolutely right. I mean, that's the story we're being told. Let's hope we can make that into something big in the future, but at the moment it just seems to be us telling our story to ourselves. Hopefully we'll get this over the line. Interestingly, with the National Animal Identification and Tracing Scheme being imposed from 1 July this year, effectively you would expect some farmers to say to their meat co-op, we want to know our own meat product and we want to be able to market it ourselves through the co-op. I'm waiting to hear that argument because it will put lots of tension in the meat industry.
True.
Just before we go to break, can I just touch on dirty dairying, as loath as I am to use that label? I know dairy farmers hate that, but Colin Armour, leading Fonterra director, has been done for an effluent spill from one of his Bay of Plenty farms. Fined $72,000 plus costs. Is that steep?
Oh, it is. Look, I don't know anything about the case, but I'll offer an opinion anyway.
It was a split pipe. Apparently it leaked into a paddock for 24 hours and flowed into a nearby stream and to a nearby beach. Sure,
okay. I bet my bottom dollar that Colin Armour himself wasn't anywhere on the farm.
He wasn't on the farm, you're dead right.
And so all of us that have that own farms and have other people operating for them for us, we all worry about the fact when our staff let us down and we have a technical breach like that where there's perhaps no huge environmental impact, but it's very, very serious, and the fines are absolutely horrific compared to other things you might do to get a fine of $72,000. I can't begin to think, as a person living, an urban person, what you would have to do to get a $72,000 fine. So the fines are very, very significant, quite out of proportion with the level of the damage done to the community compared to other things. However, we know what the rules are, and we try to do our very best, but the trouble is things break down.
More in store after the break, including catching the crims. Farmers fed up with thieves ripping them off are turning to technology. We talk the use of surveillance cameras down on the farm. Come back soon for more Straight Talk. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. We're back with Don Nicolson and Charlie Pedersen. Can we talk security on the farm? Charlie, you were in the news 4 or 5 years ago, one of a number of Manawatu farmers fed up with being ripped off by thieves and installed surveillance cameras on one of your farms. How'd that go?
Oh, we're very pleased with it, and the problem with it is it becomes addictive. So we now have surveillance cameras on a number of farms and different types of cameras. So in the fixed installations like dairy sheds, we have fixed cameras, and then we have another bunch of cameras that we can shift around the farm and put in places where we think we might be having breaches. We might have a camera watching a fuel tank for a while if we think we're having a problem, and we might have one watching, you know, another gateway or something if we think there's a problem. So it's an addictive act once you get going. one that you just couldn't turn back from. We have saved ourselves tens of thousands of dollars of theft by having these cameras. And the interesting thing is, once the local thieves find out you've got cameras installed, they'll leave you alone.
Right. So you do advertise the fact. I was going to say, is this a kind of covert operation, or you make sure they know there's cameras there?
They seem to work out that they are there. We were having milk stolen from one of our sheds, and we put surveillance cameras in there, and the milk theft stopped immediately, and yet we never saw anybody on camera. So we figure they're just like people that steal in supermarkets or whatever. When they know they look out for cameras. When they see them, they go somewhere else.
Don, is it a path you've gone down?
No, not for me. But I can't even imagine why we allow the psyche of New Zealanders to disrespect the property of others so much. I mean, there's always been criminal behaviour in society, but the fact that it seems to be burgeoning, I've got no data to back that up. Why is it that we keep allowing or educating our children somewhere that this is okay, that they can have the property of others? It's just wrong. I don't know how you could ever sanction it in a family.
I know that police have said, I think, too, petrol, thefts of fuel has been a big problem on farms because, motorbikes as well. That's something, it's like if everything's fair game.
It is, and you just can't lock everything up. It's just impossible. So wherever you are, you can't lock everything up. So a camera is a very good deterrent. And and if the worst thing happens and you do get something stolen, it's such a great feeling to be able to ring the police and say, actually, I can provide you with an email embedded in it, an attachment that gives you the film of the person who did this. It's a great feeling, and I've had it a couple of times, and it's well worth the $10,000 or $15,000 it costs you to put the systems in.
I was going to ask you, have you ever caught anybody? Yeah. You have?
Yes, we have. Yeah.
Were they local people?
Reasonably local, yeah, and living in our community.
And the cost, I mean, do you buy the cameras or lease them? How does that work?
We've got a mix of both. Some cameras we own. The last lot we put in, we've actually leased. And the beauty of that is that the people who we do the business with actually provide a continual warranty while you're leasing their gear. So, that stuff becomes pretty obsolete pretty quickly, just like your computer does. And it's nice to have it continually upgraded and kept running properly.
As you say, Don, it's a shame that farmers have to resort to such tactics, I guess, just to protect what they have.
Yeah, it is, and it annoys me a lot. But look, I think it is important that farmers really look out for their neighbours as well. Watch for those alternative cars or vehicles that are going up and down roads, a whole lot of things like that. Sadly, farmers steal from farmers as well, and that's abhorrent. I don't know how anyone could ever do it. Just
when times are tough, they think it's okay?
Well, I think some people have got it ingrained in them that it's okay. Regardless of whether times are tough.
And technology, I guess, is becoming cheaper as well, so this sort of level of this measure of security is becoming more affordable.
Yes, as you said, Karen, we started with it 5 or maybe 6 years ago, and the cost is easily halved in that time, and the technology has probably doubled. It's just an amazing transition.
And I wonder too, is it something that perhaps appeals to younger farmers? Old school farmers might still think, let the dogs out, grab the rifle kind of thing. Is it something possibly that there's more take-up with tech-savvy younger farmers?
I don't know about that. I don't count myself as tech-savvy or young, and we've been early adopters, and I think that it'll catch on. It's just protecting your asset.
Just before we go, Federated Farmers Conference happening this week in the AGM. Don, what are some of the key issues, do you think?
Well, I imagine it's the same old issues like environment, like local government, like compliance regimes, things like that. I mean, nothing changes much in Feds over time, but they've got an election, I have to say. David Rose is retiring, the Southland Board Director, and so they've got an election to take place, and it'll be interesting to see who the new people are.
And how are farmers likely to be feeling about their economic futures, short and long term?
Well, the situations and outlook for primary industry report came out recently, minus some of the data that it normally has, but it did suggest that next year and perhaps the year after that, things aren't going to be too flash. We're going to be returning under 10 cents in the dollar to inside the farm gate for our tax, for our wages and for capital expenditure. So we're back down to where we were a couple of years ago. But sometimes things don't happen that way. The situations and outlook for New Zealand ag and forestry, as it used to be called, was often wrong. So let's hope that it is wrong this year.
Charlie, predictions?
I think that I'm as happy farming as I ever have been. I think that people There's more people in the world. They're wanting better food. They're getting richer. That story that's been going on for a few years now, and it got interrupted. The good times got interrupted for New Zealand farmers by the global financial crisis. I have it in a good feeling that it will unfold over in front of us in the next 3 to 5 years, and we'll have a very good time, and the rest of New Zealand will have a very good time on the back of that.
Nice to finish on a positive note. You've been watching Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Thanks to my guests, Don Nicolson and Charlie Pedersen, and as always, to you at home for watching. If you'd like to get in touch, see the Country 99 TV website. It'd be great to hear from you. Drop us a line. I'm Karen McCarthy. See you next time for more Straight Talk.